And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I had a question from a patron on the Discord today that I thought was a pretty interesting one, and I decided to actually do a video about it on my channel. They were asking about uncards and whether or not I thought there was any uncards, especially ones from back in the day, that, you know, we could easily just put black borders on them and play them in the Commander format, because particularly by today's standards, maybe not so goofy anymore, right? Those cards, and I remember very well when they first came out, they at the time seemed really goofy. And when you go back and look at some of them now, not so much. So let's go back and look at them. The original unset, unglued, of course, and I remember very well when it first came out. This was super nostalgic for me, of course. They asked me this question, and then I went and actually looked at some of the cards, and I'm like, oh man, I remember when these cards came out. I had been playing Magic for about a year, I think, when these cards came out, and of course, the reception, I remember being, you know, very much all over the place. Of course, I didn't love them. I thought they were goofy, but they're silver bordered, right? Therefore, that's what they're for. They're for the goofiness. I mean, Ashnod's Coupon, that one in particular, that one made me laugh when I first saw it. Sacrifice it, target player gets you target drink. They're supposed to make you laugh. I always liked when the unsets came out because it was just a joke for me. I mean, playing with them as well, obviously, is also a joke. They're meant to be silly. They're sort of, it's lampooning the game of Magic, but also can be used to, you know, play an actual game, but in some cases a silly game. You know, some of these, like Chaos Confetti, again, a funny one, making fun of Chaos Orb. Like some of these, obviously, you would never actually play in a real game. You actually have to rip this card up. I don't know how many people have actually ever done that. Some of them certainly are without, like Clay Pigeon, you know, they do really, really goofy things, without a doubt. Some of them, though, like if you look at Big Furry Monster here, and then, man, this guy was expensive. I don't know if it still is. Maybe we can check on it. $9. It used to be pretty expensive back in the day because people actually wanted this. And of course, the super goofy idea here is we're combining two cards into one. Okay, well, hold on. We're already doing that in Magic now, right? The meld cards are doing that. So, I mean, this would be a good example of a card you look at and you go, okay, it costs 15 black mana, all black pips. It is a 99/99, and it can only be blocked by 3 or more creatures. So essentially, it's a one-hit kill in the Commander format, right? Again, I'm talking about these cards as if we're playing them in Commander. A Blightsteel Colossus is already a one-hit kill. So, and it costs less than 15 black pips. And you would need both of these in your hand, right? You need both these cards. So these cards would be separate in your deck. You'd have to draw them, and then you'd have to have them both in your hand, and you pay the 15 mana. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a bit too goofy for the Commander format, but it's not terrible. There are ones, though, that for sure we could see in the Commander format. In particular, the dice rolling cards, and this is an easy one. Real easy. That was what the patron actually particularly asked me about. Dice rolling at the time, again, when they came out with this set, there was a big dice rolling theme. At the time, that seemed goofy. Now we actually have dice rolling commanders in the Commander format. So a lot of these are actually super easy slam dunks for reprinting it as a black-bordered card to play in the Commander format, or even if I was playing in a Commander game, and again, this is all the Rule Zero stuff here, right? If I'm playing in a Commander game and some guy has this in his deck because he wants dice rolling cards in there, I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with that. You know, it is a Rule Zero discussion. 2 and a black bird, spirit, 1/1 with flying. Whenever a creature dies, you may roll a 6-sided dice. If you roll a 1, you sacrifice it. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Sure. I mean, it's an okay creature. Obviously, if you get it up to like a 6/6 and then you got to sacrifice it, that's not great, but it gets you lots of those dice rolling triggers, which is why you would want to play it, right? Chicken egg, same thing. 1 and a red, 0/1 egg. At the beginning of your upkeep, roll a 6-sided die. If you roll a 6, sacrifice it, and you get a 4/4 giant bird creature token. So here, there's no downside. This guy just sits here rolling you dice every upkeep. You probably even don't want to roll the 6 because you're just getting a free dice roll off of it every turn, right? So great fit in any of those dice rolling decks. I mean, maybe you would change like the name, the creature type. They actually don't have chickens. They errated it to, it's not a chicken that you're making. It is a giant bird, but you could easily see this card with a black border, different name in say a Commander set coming up. No question. Growth Spurt, again, super easy one. This one, I don't even think you'd have to change the name, maybe change the art. 1 and a green instant. Roll a 6-sided die. Target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the result. Easy, right? Goblin Bowling Team, 3 and a red. Goblin 1/1. If Goblin Bowling Team would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage plus the result of a 6-sided die roll to that permanent or player instead. Again, easy. Piece of cake. Maybe change the picture, maybe change the name. I will just say though, like one of the goofiest cards, and Goblin cards are already kind of goofy, and I'll talk about a few more here. That's why they did so much Goblin stuff in the unsets, because Goblins are already goofy. I mean, you just think about Goblin Game. Man, talk about a card does that ever feel like an uncard? And it absolutely is not. And it's very much legal in the Commander format. I can't think of a goofier card than that. That's the goofiest card available in the Commander format, without a question, in my opinion. It even, in my opinion, is goofier than some of the Unfinity cards, right? So you have those Unfinity cards, which of course are black bordered, that you can play in the Commander format, like Paradise Lost. The name's kind of goofy, but it's actually a good card, and it's less goofy, in my opinion, than Goblin Game. And Goblin Game, in my opinion, again, is even kind of goofier than Goblin Bowling Team, even though the Bowling Team part is kind of goofy, but certainly fits in the Commander format. Chicken a la King, again, really silly name, but this is actually a pretty good card, and this would absolutely see play in the Commander format, in my opinion. 1 blue bird noble. Again, they changed the chicken creature type. We don't actually have any, and it's a 2/2. Whenever a 6 is rolled on a 6-sided die, by the way, that is all players. Anyone rolling a 6-sided die, put a +1 counter on each bird. Again, all the birds in play, not just yours. So we're doing the dice rolling thing, and we're putting counters on our birds. So this goes in bird tribal. And I know people say, well, you got to roll dice. No problem. Tap an untapped bird you control. Again, not chickens. Roll a 6-sided die. So this is actually a pretty darn good fit. And I guarantee you, if this was, I wonder if there's anyone out playing this out there. Let me know. Maybe you have a bird tribal deck and you have ruled zeroed it with your play group, and they are okay with you throwing this in your bird tribal deck. I totally would be. If I had, say, a patron that wanted to make a bird tribal deck and wanted this in there, I would be totally okay with it. And it's actually not bad. Tap an untapped bird you control, you roll the dice. Whenever you roll a 6, I mean, the chances aren't super great, but if you have like 5 birds in play, tap them all down on your opponent's end step, might roll a couple 6s, right? It's actually not terrible. Obviously, as a commander, it would be pretty neat as well. Clambassadors, this one's actually really interesting. And again, this is a card that if it was black bordered, it 100% would be in commander. And we obviously know where. 3 and a blue. Clamfolk 4/4. Whenever Clambassadors deals damage to a player, choose an artifact, creature, or land you control. That player gains control of that permanent. So it's a creature that is donating stuff. Absolutely, this would see play in the commander format. It would probably go in every Zedru deck, probably a lot of other decks as well, where you want to be donating horrible stuff to your opponent for a variety of reasons, right? How about the Cheese Stands Alone? Again, this is another one that made me laugh when I first saw it. 4 white enchantment. When you control no permanents other than the Cheese Stands Alone and have no cards in hand, you win the game. And of course, this, I imagine Baron Glory, which of course came after this, that's where the idea came from for that card, because it's almost identical. And in fact, the Cheese Stands Alone is actually better because it is just, that condition. There is no upkeep trigger here. It's just, as soon as you have no permanents other than Cheese Stands Alone and no cards in hand, you win the game. That's it. So it's actually a lot easier to use than Baron Glory. But again, other than the silly name and the silly picture, for sure you could play this in the commander format, right? Free for all. Now we're getting to some really interesting ones here. I actually like this card a lot. So 3 and a blue enchantment. And again, thinking about this was considered super goofy back in the day. Now it's like, really not goofy at all. And in fact, in this situation, I mean, yeah, the art's kind of goofy, but the name is not goofy at all. When free for all enters the battlefield, exile all creatures face down. So and again, is this a mono blue card? Maybe not. Maybe there'd be some color changing here as well. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player chooses a card exiled with free for all at random and puts it onto the battlefield. So I guess this feels like a very red card. It's a chaos card, right? Red and blue, maybe. Maybe this could be a blue-red card, but it enters the battlefield, you exile all creatures face down. So first of all, this is a mono-blue board wipe. That's why I think it's pretty significant. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, and again, the each player's upkeep part fits really nicely in Commander. Now, I'll just say I don't love a guy stealing my creatures, but of course, there's already a lot of that going on in the format, obviously, right? When free for all leaves the battlefield, put all cards exiled with it into owner's graveyard. So again, this is just a mono blue board wipe where you can exile all creatures and then have this leave the battlefield immediately, sacrifice it, and it just becomes a board wipe, right? So pretty significant there all around, and actually really neat. And again, there are commanders that want you to be controlling your opponent's creatures and all that, where this is actually a pretty good fit. I actually like this card a lot. This is a card that you could very easily put a black border on it, maybe change the art. That's it. Wham, right in the commander format as is, in my opinion. Goblin Bookie, again, another one that for me, this is an easy one. And as I said already, goblins are already goofy. You don't even have to change the name. Maybe put some new art on this and a black border straight into the commander format, and it would go straight into a whole bunch of decks. In fact, this might even be a pretty expensive card because there's so many decks in the format that are going to want to auto-include it. 1 red, Goblin 1/1. Pay 1 red and tap. Reflip any coin or re-roll any die. Every coin flipping deck and any die rolling deck in red is going to want to play this card likely, right? So yeah, auto include in those decks. And I mean, again, Kark's Thumb is already doing this, right? Kark's Thumb is doing this with the coin flipping thing, essentially. So you're just adding on the die roll as well. And again, Kark's Thumb that's another card that kind of feels like an uncard a little bit, right? The only difference with this one is now we're adding on the reroll of a die as well. So yeah, this is an easy one for sure. And this one for sure really, really shows you how things have changed, how a card like this that was seen as really super goofy when it came out back then, now doesn't seem goofy at all. Goblin Tutor, 1 red mana instant. Roll a 6-sided die. If you roll a 1, Goblin Tutor has no effect. Otherwise, search your library for the indicated card, reveal it, and put it in your hand. So if you roll a 2, a card named Goblin Tutor, obviously that's not going to work because you can only have 1 card in your deck named Goblin Tutor. So I guess here, rolling a 1 or a 2 will get you nothing. It's just a whiff, which is not great, but it is only 1 mana. 3, 4, 5, or 6, you can get an enchantment, you can get an artifact, you can get a creature, or you can get an instant sorcery. How good is this? And again, this to me, we don't have to change the name. We don't have to do nothing about this. This is a card that I would totally be okay with in the commander format. Absolutely. If anyone out there wants to play a commander game against me and has a Goblin Tutor in their deck, I'm not going to have an issue with it. Not even a little bit. I think this is totally fair. It's actually a pretty good tutor. Now, is it better than Gamble? I mean, obviously mono red isn't great at tutoring. Gamble does have the possibility to get the card you want and then chuck it in your graveyard. So again, Gamble has the possibility to accomplish nothing. Maybe you want it in your graveyard, but I've seen Gamble cast a lot in a commander game and accomplish absolutely nothing. This can as well. I'd say your chances are almost better. Which one is the better option for getting something that you want? This is actually a pretty decent tutor, I think. And I think it's totally okay in the commander format. Giant Fan. This is absolutely a card that not only do I think it's good in the commander format, I think it's a pretty neat card that they should print in a commander set. And again, I mean, Giant Fan, the name's maybe a little goofy. I mean, the picture certainly is, but wouldn't take much to put this in the commander format, and it would absolutely be played in a ton of decks. Of all the cards that I'm talking about here, this is the one that for sure is going to be a slam dunk in a ton of commander decks. 4 mana artifact, pay 2 and tap, move a counter from one permanent onto another. If the second permanent refers to any kind of counter, the move counter becomes one of those counters. Otherwise, it becomes a +1/+1 counter. So this card is doing so much. Obviously, we have effects like this already, like a Nesting Grounds. However, this one does so much more because, of course, you can turn counters into +1/+1 counters. I can just take some lame, meaningless counter off of one of my permanents, put it on a creature, and it becomes a +1/+1 counter. So you could put this in a lot of +1/+1 counter decks for that reason. But of course, the big one is I can turn counters into whatever's already on that card. So I can move a +1/+1 counter onto my Planeswalker and turn it into a loyalty counter, right? So rules interaction wise, maybe we got some issues here. I don't know. But if this was an actual blackboarded card for the commander format, it for sure would go in a ton of decks. Let's talk about our Organ Harvest. Again, this one's an easy slam dunk in the commander format, I think. 1 black mana sorcery. Your team may sacrifice any number of creatures. For each creature sacrificed this way, you add 2 black. So again, the only part that's maybe a little goofy about this is the team part, which of course we've already seen in like Battle Bond cards, for example. They talk about teammates and stuff like that. And obviously, if you're just playing a normal old commander game, the teammates part doesn't apply. It's just you. You're a team of one. Same would be with this card. Your team may sacrifice any. I mean, there is a chance you are playing with a team, so that's also a great use for this card, just like with the Battle Bond cards. But typically, you would play this in your deck and it would just affect you because you're a team of one. And this is just sacrifice any number of creatures and get a great ritual effect. Again, you don't even have to change the name. You don't have to change the picture. You can change nothing about this. Put a black border on it, and it's a great card in a commander game, for sure. I like this one a lot. And again, goofy name, goofy picture. And this one, you'd have to change the wording on it. But what this card is doing, I actually really like. Look at me. I'm the DCI, obviously, is, sort of poking fun at the DCI. 5 white sorcery, so it's a lot. It's 7 mana. And honestly, I mean, we won't talk about mana cost here. Maybe that's appropriate. Ban a card other than a basic land card from the rest of the game. So the ruling they're using here, they're saying ban a card. That's the goofy part, right? If you read the reminder text, though, all cards with that name in any zone or sideboard are removed from the match. So if you think about it, what this card is doing, right? Again, other than a basic land, obviously, you can cast this card and remove the card from the match. But if we reword this card, this is actually a card that I wouldn't mind seeing them print. And I think it probably would be mono white. Would it cost 7? I don't even know if it would cost 7. Again, you guys can let me know in the comments below how much a card like this would cost. What essentially this card is doing, which is name a card, exile all permanents with that name, and exile all cards from all graveyards with that name. Something like that. The chosen card can't be cast for the rest of the game. So it's doing you're doing the removal thing, you're exiling that permanent, but also you're doing the meddling mage thing where you can't cast that card either, right? So you are essentially banning a card for the rest of the game because it can't be cast, and if it's already in play, it gets exiled. I suppose there would be the rare situation where you could cheat it into play from your library. That would get around the cast, and that would get, and again, I guess you could throw in there, search each player's library for that card and exile. Nah, we don't need to go that far. I just think having a card, it's just a sorcery that says, and again, how much would that cost? I don't think it needs to cost 7. I think it costs a lot less than that. Again, power creep is a thing, right? So you just cast this card, it's a sorcery, exile all permanents with the chosen name, obviously not a basic land. So it's a great way to just get a problematic, I just get rid of your Blightsteel Colossus with it, stuff like that. But also I can use it to ban a card from being played. Now, of course, in the commander format, the problem becomes I can just ban someone's commander from being played. That's not great. Obviously, that's not fun. But again, there are already cards that do that, right? You can already cast a meddling mage, stuff like that. I mean, geez, even Drannith Magistrate is a thing which doesn't allow any of your opponents to cast their commander. So I don't know. I just think the idea of a card like that, banishing a card from the game. I suppose if you actually printed a card like this in a commander set, you could say, name a card other than a basic land or a commander. So a non-commander card, something like that. Maybe. I just think it's an interesting concept for a removal spell. Lastly, I'm going to talk about checks and balances. And again, this is one that some people might very much have an issue with because, again, just like the last card, it sort of stops you from doing things, which, of course, commander players want to do this stuff, right? As I say, nobody wants to be stopped from doing the things that they want to be doing, and this will do that. However, this card easily could be called, you could rename this card Rule 0 because it is essentially a card that allows you to rule 0 things as the game goes on, which I find very interesting. Again, you would have to change some things about this card, but when I saw this card, I was like, man, that's an interesting concept for a really neat commander card. So 2 and a blue enchantment. Cast this spell only if there are 3 or more players in the game. They were pushing for the multiplayer, sort of setup. Obviously, commander didn't even exist when this card came out. Multiplayer formats were very rare. You didn't see it very often. I used to play Emperor back in the day, if anybody knows what that is. Back at my LGS 3v3, right? You would have to change the wording there a little bit. The wording would have to be, you can only cast it if you have 2 or more opponents, I would say something like that. And at the beginning of each end step, I think if you only had 1 opponent, you'd have to sacrifice it. And there's a very specific reason why, okay? When a player casts a spell, each of that player's opponents may discard a card if they do counter that spell. I actually really like that. And the reason why, again, is because it actually fixes a bunch of things. It fixes the really unfun play, right? So if some guy's going to play a Winter Orb, all the opponents are like, yeah, that didn't happen, right? So anybody who hates those stacks of effects, and you all have to agree, right? All three opponents have to discard a card in order for that spell to get countered. Obviously, there's a ways around this, right? If one opponent doesn't have any cards in hand, they can't. So obviously this doesn't work. If you have something that's uncounterable, it doesn't work, obviously, right? So there are ways around this. It could get really unfun, sure. I will just say again, Zur's Weirding is a card, again, the very available card in the Commander format. 3 and a blue enchantment. Players play with their hands revealed. If a player would draw a card, they reveal it instead. Then any other player may pay 2 life. If that player does, they put it into their graveyard. Otherwise, they draw it. So every card that everyone reveals, any player can pay 2 life to make them discard it. That's very similar, in my opinion. And again, this is another card that, man, someone draws their Winter Orb, their Expropriate, any card you really don't like, chuck that in the bin, right? This is a very powerful effect, actually, and again, is doing something very similar. And in fact, in that case, it's only one player. Here, you have to have all opponents agree. That's the part I like about it. You'd have to change some stuff about this for sure. But I like the idea, sort of the mid-game Rule Zero thing, where some guy casts an Armageddon and all the other guys are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is a casual game. Why are you playing mass land destruction? And they can all just discard a card to counter that spell. So that part about it, I really think is interesting. All right, there you go. Some uncards that I think certainly could see play in the Commander format. Again, you can't absolutely Rule Zero this stuff. If I had a patron that said, hey, I got a Chicken a la King in my Bird Tribal deck, or I got a Goblin Tutor in my deck, I'd be like, no problem. That is always the case, right? The Rule Zero thing is big there. So, we have obviously uncards. The Unfinity set is black bordered. So we're already there. A lot of these cards I talked about, a lot of them have to do with dice rolling, which that's already in the Commander format. Obviously, there are commanders that are doing that. Some of them would love to see some of these cards. So, maybe I'm opening a can of worms here, and a lot of people are like, no, don't do that. But again, the Rule Zero thing always fixes this kind of stuff. And a lot of these cards, maybe people are watching this and they're like, oh, I'd love that to be in my whatever deck. Now I can go talk to my play group and say, hey, can I play this card? And they'll probably be okay with it. I mean, I don't think any of these are super busted. Most of them are completely okay. And a lot of them are really interesting. Man, things have changed, right? Again, I remember when these cards came out and they were so goofy, so silly. Now they don't seem that goofy. Again, other than some of the names like the cheese stands alone and stuff like that. Other than that, man, a lot of these cards perfectly playable in the Commander format, I think. You guys let me know in the comments below what you think of these cards, and if possibly you are already playing. I know there are people out there that do play uncards in their Commander decks. Obviously, their play group is okay with it. You guys let me know if you're playing any in the comments below. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.